in the frozen lands of the north, where the seas rage and the skies are painted with fire and storm, the Vikings forged a world of gods and monsters. To them, thunder was the hammer of Thor, wisdom was the gift of Odin, and death was not an ending but a passage to Valhalla. This is the story of the gods of the north, and the beliefs that shaped the Vikings' lives, their wars, and their voyages beyond the edge of the known world. Welcome, traveler, to the second chapter in our journey through the history of the Vikings. In this episode, we step beyond the realm of ships and swords, and into the soul of Viking culture, their myths, their gods, and their vision of existence itself. For the Vikings, the world was not a simple place of earth and sky, but a living tapestry woven of 9 realms, bound together by the roots and branches of the great world tree, Yggdrasil. Every storm, every victory, every death, was not merely chance, it was a reflection of divine will, of the struggles of gods and giants, of destiny itself. The Norse believed their lives were tied to a cosmic drama, and in this drama they found strength, courage, and meaning. Today, we will enter their world, and uncover how these beliefs guided them across the seas, into battle, and toward eternity. The Norse cosmos. The Vikings believed they lived in a universe vast and layered, known as the 9 worlds. At its center stood Yggdrasil, the immense ash tree that connected all realms of existence. Its branches reached into the heavens, its roots plunged into the underworld, and its trunk spanned the realm of men. High above, in the realm of Asgard, dwelt the Geir, the gods of power, war, and wisdom, with Odin as their king. Nearby, the realm of Vanaheim was home to the Vanai gods of fertility, prosperity, and the natural cycles. The 2 tribes of gods had once warred against each other, but later reconciled, exchanging hostages and forging bonds of reflection. Perhaps the Viking belief in balance between war and peace, order and fertility. Below, Midgard stretched the world of men, encircled by a great serpent, Jormungandr, whose coils rested in the sea, waiting to rise at the end of days. Beyond lay Jotunheim, the land of the giants, the eternal rivals of the gods, beings of chaos and primeval force. Niflheim, a realm of frost and ice, whispered with the breath of the dead, while Muspelheim burned with eternal fire, ruled by the fire giant Surtur. Svartalfheim housed the dwarves, masters of craft and magic, while Alfheim was home to the light elves, radiant beings tied to nature. This was the Viking cosmos, vast, dangerous, alive with gods and spirits. For the Norse, their own struggles mirrored the struggles of the gods, and every battle on earth was but an echo of the eternal war raging across the 9 realms. Odin the All-Father. At the heart of Norse belief stood Odin, the All-Father. He was a god unlike any other god, of wisdom, of kingship, of sacrifice. To the Vikings, Odin embodied the relentless pursuit of knowledge, even at great cost. Odin was said to have plucked out one of his own eyes and cast it into the well of Mimir in exchange for a single drink of wisdom's waters. He hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, in order to gain the secrets of the runes. He was a wanderer, a seeker of truth, roaming the 9 worlds in disguise, ever hungry for secrets that might grant strength to the gods in their endless struggle against fate. Yet Odin was also a war god. Before battle, warriors prayed to him, hoping he would cast his spear over the enemy and grant victory. But Odin's favor was fickle, for though he granted triumph, he also chose who would fall. Those who died bravely, with a weapon in hand, were gathered by the Valkyries, Odin's shield maidens, who carried the honored dead to Valhalla, his great hall. There they would feast, drink, and prepare for the final battle of Ragnarok. Odin was a god both feared and revered. His gifts came at a price, and his wisdom often carried shadows. Yet for the Vikings, he represented the highest ideal, the willingness to sacrifice everything, even oneself, for greater knowledge, for honor, for the survival of one's people. Thor, defender of Midgard. If Odin was the wise but distant father, Thor was the beloved protector. Wielding his mighty hammer Mjolnir, Thor was the defender of gods and men alike. He was the god of thunder, of strength, of storms, and, above all, of Midgard, the world of humankind. The Vikings saw in Thor a guardian who stood against the giants, hurling thunderbolts across the sky. Every storm was his doing, the echo of his hammer striking down enemies of order. Mjolnir was more than a weapon. It was a sacred symbol, a tool of blessing and protection. Vikings wore Thor's hammer pendants around their necks as charms against evil, and it was used in rituals of consecration hallowing marriages, births, and even funerals. Thor's popularity among the common people was immense. Where Odin was tied to kings and chieftains, Thor was the god of the farmer, the sailor, the warrior who sought strength in the chaos of life. In him, the Norse saw not just divine power, but reliability, the reassurance that no matter how dark the world became, Thor would stand beside them, hammer in hand, to hold back the storm. Loki, trickster and catalyst. Yet not all the Norse gods were protectors. Among them was Loki, the trickster, neither wholly good nor wholly evil. Loki was a figure of chaos, mischief, and transformation. A shapeshifter, Loki could take on many forms, male or female, beast or human. He was cunning, clever, often deceitful, and his schemes brought both aid and disaster to the gods. He was the father of monsters, the wolf, Fenrir, the serpent, Jormungandr, and Hel, queen of the dead. And yet, without Loki, many of the gods' greatest treasures, Thor's hammer, Odin's spear, Freyja's ship, would not exist, for it was often through his tricks and bargains that such wonders were forged. But Loki's path was destined for darkness. Though he walked among the gods, his heart belonged to the giants, and his actions would one day bring about their doom. For it was foretold that Loki would betray the gods, leading the forces of chaos against them at Ragnarok. To the Vikings, Loki was a reminder of life's unpredictability. He embodied the truth that even within order lies chaos, and within friendship, betrayal. In him, the Norse saw both danger and necessity, for even the trickster played a role in the great design, Valhalla and the afterlife. For the Vikings, death was not the end, but a passage into another realm. The most glorious fate was to die in battle, weapon in hand. Such warriors were chosen by the Valkyries, those spectral maidens who rode across the skies, seeking the slain. The chosen were taken to Valhalla, Odin's hall of the slain. There, they feasted on endless roast boar, drank mead from the udders of a cosmic goat, and fought each day in preparation for Ragnarok. To a Viking, this was not a grim afterlife, but the ultimate reward, a place of honor, of endless battle and endless joy. Yet Valhalla was not the only destination. Some were taken to the field of the goddess Freyja, where the brave also dwelled. Others went to Hel, the cold and shadowy realm ruled by Loki's daughter Hel, where those who died of illness or old age resided. This was not always a place of torment, it was simply another realm of existence, another echo of the Viking belief that life and death were woven into the cycles of the cosmos. Freyja and the Vanir gods. If Odin and Thor stood as pillars of war and protection, then Freyja embodied the beauty and power of life itself. She was the goddess of love and desire, but also of war and death, of fertility and prophecy. To the Vikings, Freyja was a figure of contradictions, gentle and fierce, nurturing and terrifying. She was of the Vanir, that tribe of gods, more ancient than the Geir. The Vanir were tied to the earth, to the cycles of harvest and fertility, to the mysteries of magic. Yet Freyja herself was more than that. She was also a chooser of the slain. Like Odin, she gathered warriors after death, and half of those who died in battle were said to go to her field, while the other half went to Valhalla. Freyja was also mistress of seer, the ancient magic of prophecy and fate. This form of sorcery was feared and revered among the Vikings, for it touched the very threads of destiny. She taught it to Odin, giving the All-Father knowledge of weaving fate. Though it came with dangers, for men who practiced seer were often shamed, thought to be unmanly, since the magic was considered feminine. Yet Odin cared little for shame when wisdom was at stake, once more showing his hunger for every tool to fight against doom. Her symbols were many: the necklace, a jewel of unmatched beauty; her cloak of falcon feathers, which allowed her to fly between worlds; and her chariot, drawn by cat creatures sacred to her and beloved in Norse households. Freyja embodied the truth that life and death are not opposites, but part of a whole. To love is to risk loss. To live is to move toward death, and in both, she reigns supreme. Rituals and worship. But how did the Vikings honor their gods? Unlike the towering cathedrals of later Europe, Viking worship was woven into nature itself. Sacred groves, waterfalls, mountains, and stones became the altars of the Norse. At these hofts and sacred places, chieftains and priests, called Goga, led sacrifices to the gods. These sacrifices, known as, ranged from offerings of food and mead to the spilling of blood. Animals were most often given horses, goats, cattle, but in rare and dire times, human sacrifice was recorded, especially to Odin, who demanded life for wisdom. The blood was smeared upon idols and sacred posts, the meat cooked and shared in a great feast, binding community, gods, and ancestors together. The Vikings did not pray in silence. They feasted, sang, told stories, and drank deep from horns of mead, believing that joy itself was an offering to the divine. Life was fleeting, death was certain, and so to live well, to honor the gods in celebration, was as sacred as any solemn rite. Seasonal festivals marked the turning of the year. Yule, the midwinter celebration of rebirth; Midsummer, with its fires to honor the sun; and harvest rites, calling upon the Vanir for fertility and bounty. Each cycle of the year was tied to divine rhythm, and the Vikings lived in harmony with that flow. Seer and the power of magic. Among the deepest mysteries of Viking belief was magic, seer, Galder, and runic sorcery. To the Norse, the world was woven of hidden forces, and those with knowledge could bend it. Ca was the weaving of fate, the seeing of what was yet to come. Practitioners, known as vulvas or seeresses, were often women of great respect and fear. They carried staffs, wore cloaks of animal skins, and spoke in strange chants that opened visions of destiny. Kings and warriors sought their counsel, though sometimes with dread, for fate could not always be changed. Odin himself was a master of seer, taught by Freyja, though his practice was controversial. For men, to wield such magic was thought dishonorable, associated with unmanliness and deceit. Yet Odin, ever hungry for power, cared little for custom. Beyond seer, there was Galdra magic, the chanting of spells and charms. Runes, too, were sacred, carved into wood, bone, or stone, each symbol carrying a cosmic force. To inscribe runes was to shape reality, to call upon the hidden threads of the universe itself. For the Vikings, magic was not superstition, it was a living truth. The gods themselves practiced it, and so too could mortals, if they dared to walk its dangerous path. The Norns and fate. Central to Norse belief was fate, known as word or group. Unlike later Christian thought, where free will battled against destiny, the Norse believed that fate was woven into the very fabric of existence. At the roots of Yggdrasil sat the three Norns: what has been Vergandi, what is becoming, and Skuld, what shall be. These weavers of destiny carved the fates of gods and men alike. Even Odin, even Thor, even the whole host of Asgard could not escape their weaving. This belief in inevitable fate shaped the Viking spirit. To them, death was certain, doom was written, yet how one faced it, that was choice. Bravery, honor, laughter, in the face of despair, these were the marks of a life well lived. It was not about escaping fate, but about meeting it with courage. In this, we find the heart of the Viking worldview, that life is short, the world is harsh, and the gods themselves are doomed, yet to live with strength. To embrace both joy and sorrow was to achieve immortality. Ragnarok, the doom of the gods. All Viking belief pointed toward a single end. Ragnarok, the fate of the gods. It was not simply a story of apocalypse, it was the cosmic truth that even gods must die. The prophecy told of a time when the bonds of the world would break. The long winter, Fimbulvita, would fall, with snow and ice choking the earth for years. Brothers would slay brothers. Fathers would betray sons. The bonds of kinship would unravel. Wolves would devour the sun and moon, plunging the world into darkness. Then the great enemies of the gods would rise. Loki, freed from his chains, would lead the giants in battle. Jormungandr would rise from the sea, poisoning the skies with his venom. Fenrir, the wolf, would break free, his jaws stretched wide enough to swallow the sun. Surtur, the fire giant, would march forth from Muspelheim, burning the world in flame. At the plain of Vigrid, the final battle would rage. Odin would face Fenrir and be devoured. Thor would slay Jormungandr, but fall to its poison. Loki and Heimdall would slay each other. One by one, the gods would fall, and the world would sink into fire and sea. Yet Ragnarok was not only an end from the ashes, a new world would rise. Green fields would bloom again. The sons of the gods would survive, carrying memory and hope. A man and a woman would hide in Yggdrasil and emerge to repopulate the earth. And above, a new sun would shine, brighter than before. To the Vikings, this was not despair, it was renewal. The cycle of destruction and rebirth was eternal. Just as seasons turned, just as crops died and grew again, so too would the world. In Ragnarok they found meaning, that even in the face of doom, life continues, and courage shines eternal. Daily beliefs and the sacred in everyday life. For the Vikings, belief in the gods was not confined to temples or festivals, it was woven into every breath of daily life. The farmer ploughing his field whispered to Freyja, god of fertility, for rich soil and strong harvests. The fisherman casting his net prayed to Enjar, god of the sea, for calm waters and plentiful catch. Women giving birth called upon Frigg, Odin's queen, for protection in labor. Amulets were worn for protection. Thor's hammer, most common of all, was both a symbol of faith and a ward against evil. Runes were carved into ships, tools, and weapons, believed to carry power. A carved rune might grant victory in battle, safety on a voyage, or healing from illness. The land itself was alive with spirits. Hills, rivers, forests, and stones were thought to house Landvita, guardian spirits of the land. Travelers would leave offerings when crossing strange terrain, and settlers would honor the local spirits so their homes might prosper. Even the dead were close. Ancestors were honored in burial mounds, believed to continue watching over their descendants. For the Norse, the sacred was never far away. It lived in the wind that carried sails, in the fire that warmed their halls, in the whisper of ravens circling above. Life itself was a constant dialogue with the divine, omens, dreams, and the supernatural. The Vikings believed the world spoke through signs, if one had the wisdom to see. Ravens flying overhead might be messengers of Odin, guiding or warning. Dreams could carry visions of the future, sent by gods or spirits. The howling of wolves, the shape of clouds, the patterns in entrails after sacrifice, all were ways the unseen world spoke to mortals. Seers and wise women played vital roles, interpreting these omens. Before great battles, leaders often sought prophecy. The sagas tell of dreams where warriors foresaw their deaths, yet rode to battle anyway, smiling, for fate could not be changed. To know was not to escape, but to prepare. This sense of fate infused Viking courage. Death in battle was not tragedy, but fulfillment. One's word had come to pass, and to meet it with bravery was the highest honor. Fear of death mattered little compared to fear of dishonor. Mythology in warfare. The battlefield was a place where Norse belief became flesh. Before combat, warriors raised their spears to Odin, casting them over the enemy in his name. Berserkers, those legendary frenzied fighters, believed themselves possessed by the spirit of animals, bears, or wolves howling with fury, fighting beyond pain or fear. The shield wall itself, the Vikings' most trusted formation, was more than strategy, it was sacred brotherhood. Each man held the line not only for himself, but for the comrade beside him, and for the glory of the gods who watched from above. Songs of the gods filled the warriors' ears before battle. The hammer of Thor gave them courage, the promise of Valhalla gave them fearlessness, and Odin's gaze reminded them that their deaths were already chosen. To a Viking, the clash of steel was an echo of the cosmic struggle between gods and giants. Every swing of a sword was part of that eternal war. Mythology and seafaring exploration, the same beliefs that fueled Viking warfare, also carried them across the seas. The north was a harsh land, winters long, harvests uncertain, the earth unyielding. Yet the Vikings did not see this as punishment, but as a challenge given by the gods. Strength was forged in hardship, and the seas themselves were a pathway to glory. Before voyages, sacrifices were made to Enjar for safe passage, to Jajar, the god of the deep, and to Ran, his wife, who was said to drag sailors to the bottom in her net. Thor, too, was invoked to calm storms, or to give strength to endure them. Navigation was not merely skill, but also faith. The sunstone, used to find the sun on cloudy days, was seen as a gift from the divine. Ravens were released from ships to guide sailors toward Landa, sacred echo of Odin's own ravens, Hugin and Munyin, thought and memory, who flew across the world. The courage to sail into unknown waters, to leave the familiar behind, came not only from ambition, but from belief. The Vikings were not alone on their voyages, they carried their gods with them. Storytelling and the oral tradition. Perhaps the greatest gift of Viking belief was its stories. Around fire-lit halls, skalds, poets, and storytellers sang of Odin's wisdom, Thor's battles, Loki's tricks, and the doom of Ragnarok. These stories were not mere entertainment, they were education, religion, and memory, binding generations together. Through verse and saga, the Vikings preserved their history and their worldview. To recite a skaldic poem was to invoke the gods themselves, to remind the people of who they were, where they came from, and what awaited them. Memory was sacred, for in remembrance lay immortality. Even the runes themselves, said to be discovered by Odin, carried poetry in their lines. Words had power to shape reality, and thus storytelling was itself a form of magic. The sagas told of courage, treachery, love, and doom. They reminded the people that even gods must fall, that fate spares no one, yet also that honor and glory shine brighter than fear. To hear these tales was to be reminded of one's place in the grand tapestry of Yggdrasil, the gods in Viking identity. In the end, Norse mythology was not just religion, it was identity. To call upon Thor was to declare oneself a protector of one's kin. To sacrifice to Odin was to embrace wisdom and fate. To honor Freyja was to respect the power of love, fertility, and death. These beliefs gave meaning to the Viking way of life: to fight, to voyage, to endure, and to celebrate. The gods were not distant, they lived within every storm, every battle, every harvest, every death. The Vikings saw themselves as part of the same struggle the gods faced, to live bravely in a world destined for doom, yet filled with beauty, joy, and the promise of renewal. And so their myths endured, carved into stone, sung in saga, carried across oceans, and, even now, they echo in our imagination, reminding us of a time when men and gods walked the same path toward fate, ancestor worship, and the dead. The Vikings did not see death as a wall, but as a doorway. The spirits of the dead lingered close, watching over their kin, shaping the fortune of households. Ancestors were honored through offerings, feasts, and the upkeep of burial mounds, where treasures, weapons, and goods were placed to aid them in the next world. Some graves were ship's-long boats buried beneath the earth, filled with goods, animals, and sometimes slaves sacrificed to accompany their lord. To the Vikings, the ship was more than transport, it was passage, carrying the soul from one world to the next. Others were cremated, their ashes scattered into the sea or sky, releasing them to the winds and waves. Fire itself was a purifier, a bridge between realms, sending the soul into the embrace of the gods. In all cases, the dead were not gone but present. To forget one's ancestors was shameful. To honor them was to keep their strength alive in the living. Memory was survival, and remembrance was worship, law, honor, and the sacred order. Myth was not only about gods and battles, it shaped Viking society itself. Law, honor, and kinship were sacred, reflecting the cosmic order the gods upheld. The Wing, the great assembly where laws were spoken and disputes settled, was not just political but spiritual. Oaths sworn at the Wing were binding not only by men but by gods. To break an oath was to invite divine wrath, for the Norse believed words carried the weight of fate itself. Honor was the cornerstone of a Viking's life. Reputation was eternal. Wealth could be lost, life could be ended, but honor outlived death. This belief was born of their mythology. The Norns wove fate. Ragnarok loomed, yet a man's name could shine forever if he lived bravely. Feuds, vengeance, and blood price were not simply cruelty, but reflections of the belief in balance. Wrong demanded right, offense demanded repayment, or the world would fall into chaos. Just as the gods warred against giants, men were bound to uphold order against dishonor. The coming of Christianity. Yet even as these beliefs bound the Norse world together, change loomed on the horizon. From the south came a new faith, Christianity, carried by missionaries, kings, and the promise of unity under a single God. At first, the old beliefs and the new coexisted. A Viking might wear Thor's hammer around his neck, yet also be baptized, hedging his fate in both worlds. Temples to Odin and Christ might stand side by side, sacrifices offered to both. But over time, the Christian God demanded exclusivity, and the hammer gave way to the cross. Kings such as Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf Haraldsson enforced conversion with sword and fire. The old groves and temples were destroyed, the forbidden, the Sirises silenced. Yet the gods of the north did not vanish. Their stories survived in secret, whispered in sagas, remembered in poetry, carved into stones. Even as the people turned to Christ, the memory of Odin's wisdom, Thor's hammer, and Ragnarok endured, shadows that still walk with us today. Legacy of the Norse beliefs. Though the Viking Age ended, the gods of the North remain eternal in memory. Their myths shaped not only the lives of their people, but also the imagination of the world that came after, the courage of facing fate, the belief that honor outlives death, the vision of a world destined for doom yet reborn anew. These ideas echo through history. They shaped the Viking drive to explore, to conquer, to endure. They gave meaning to lives lived on the edge of survival, and they carved their names into the stones of time. Today, Odin, Thor, and Freyja are no longer worshipped with sacrifice and song, yet they live in our stories, our books, our art, and even in the days of our week. Wednesday for Odin, Thursday for Thor, Friday for Frigg or Freyja. The gods have not vanished, they have transformed. The Vikings believed that memory was the truest immortality, and, in that, their gods succeeded. And so, traveler, you have walked the halls of Asgard, sailed the stormy seas of Midgard, and stood upon the plain of Ragnarok. You have seen the gods of the North not as relics of a forgotten age, but as living truths that shaped a people, their wars, and their dreams. If these tales of Odin's wisdom, Thor's hammer, and Freyja's grace have stirred your spirit, then join us again on our journey through the saga of the Vikings. Speak your thoughts in the hall of comments below, for every voice adds to the saga. Share this tale with your kin, so their names may echo in memory. And if you wish to feast with us again, to walk deeper into the sagas yet untold, then take up your horn, raise it high, and strike the runes of the All-Father's favor. Like, subscribe, and let our saga continue. For though the gods may await their doom, stories are immortal, and together we will keep them alive.